If you've ever wondered what it takes to survive in the wilderness, to learn some tips, what you would need to do just to get by in the outdoors, you would want today's guests with you. This episode, we've got Jordan Jonas. He's the winner of season number 10 of Alone, and he runs a wildlife expedition. Today, he's going to take us through some tips and tricks of how to survive in the wilderness and show us what he learned living with the Evenke tribe.
Grew up on a farm here in Idaho, up in Idaho, and then spent a bunch of years kind of doing the normal thing at a regular jobs and all that, and then had an interesting opportunity to ride freight trains with my brother around the country. So I ended up doing that, and when I was a teenager, and that kind of opened my eyes to a whole another way of living life that kind of focused a little more on autonomy and freedom, probably. and then I had, long story short, had some unique opportunities to go live in Russia. I did that, spent 5 or so years over there, got on that Alone show. That went real well. And since that, have been guiding wilderness trips and helping introduce more people to the great outdoors. I got a wife and 3 kids, and we live up here in Montana.
That's awesome. So let me ask you this. So when did you realize that you had a love for the outdoors?
I always have been drawn to the outdoors in different ways. But just even growing up as a kid, I really loved living on the farm. I loved having our animals, and it's always hanging out outside with our, be it turkeys or cows or whatever we had. So, and we had some land, so I'd go up in the woods a lot and spend time up there. That's probably a fairly typical story for folks that grew up in these areas. I think where it really started to, form into something a little more focused was partially through riding trains and just getting into that mindset. And then going to Russia and spending a lot of time there really helped me develop my love for concentrated time outdoors in a way that oftentimes, you'd overlook, I think.
So before you went out to Russia, did you have, what was your level of competency as far as survival?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I'd say average, above average. I'm sure above average, but I probably thought I had, well, I don't know, I don't know what I thought, but I know, for example, with an axe, I grew up on the farm, pretty good with an axe, and you got out there and man, I was chopping my legs all injuries all the time, just because there was quite a steep learning curve based on just regular farm life here and constant living in the forest and the demands that puts on you. So though I was competent, I had a lot to learn, I would say, but I was open to the trials that come with going in on the deep end, I guess.
Right. And who were you spending your time with out there in Russia?
Initially it was kind of in more of a Russian village context. So I was living in a little village with villagers. We'd milk the cows and cut hay with a scythe and kind of just had typical village life. And then I met some fur trapper guy who invited me up to go fur trapping with him. And that was really a learning experience. And that's when I really got thrown in the deep end, because that was a lot of time alone out in the woods, living off the land and kind of doing things I hadn't done before and pushing my boundaries. And then I ended up kind of at the same time after that, meeting up with his cousins, that fur trapper's cousins, who were all native, nomadic, reindeer herding folks. So after meeting them, I was like blown away by their way of life and that culture still, still lived in that way. And so I spent several years living with those nomads, and that was pretty eye opening too.
And what was the name their name? They were the
They were the Evenke people. So yeah, Evenke.
and
And
then
go
is there
ahead.
anything like what was the when it was all said and done when you were with them, what was some of the the biggest things that you took from living with the Evenki?
Hmm. I think maybe the things that have really stuck with me, aside from just, this skill or that, was the mindset that comes in living in some of those more traditional cultures. It made me more aware of, of course, I'm immensely aware of the amazing things we have in the modern world and all the advantages that comes with, but it also made me aware of some of the things we may have lost in the process of modernity. And so it's helped me to try to focus on holding on to some of those things too. So I think just the community that comes from living in those societies, and kind of the lack of a schedule, I'd say, and the freedom that comes with that, the waking up, and you don't have an exact plan of things you need to do. You just kind of, you wake up and you're like, okay, there's things that need to be get done, and you tackle them, kind of as you see fit. I think the lack of distraction that comes with either spending a lot of time in the wilderness alone, or just, not being unplugged from modern distractions, the ability to delve into your thoughts and be present. A lot of those types of things, I would say, really have stuck with me since living them. I was made more aware of them living with them.
Now, since you went out there and did that, and you had those experiences, now you take people out on your own wilderness excursions. Are you in a way trying to replicate that same feeling that you got when you were spending time with the Evenki, and open up the realm of possibility to the people that go out there on your excursion?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That was kind of my big motivating factor to do it. Is I've just realized what an advantage it is for myself to be able to get out there, for my family, and I kind of want to share the skills and the opportunities and mindset to other folks, so that they can, kind of feel that same richness. I think it's really important, especially in a modern context, or where to at times take the time to, honestly, just to get up in the wilderness and learn the lessons that kind of Mother Nature naturally gives. So helping facilitate that for others has been really rewarding for me. And I think it's been really positive. I know it has for a lot of people that have come out. So I love doing that and helping empower people just to see what all, the possibilities out there, learn some of those lessons, help reconnect.
Right.
Mhm.
And it sounds like so powerful to just be out there in the wilderness and have those sorts of experiences. And I've heard you talk about this before. Can you tell us a little bit of what you've observed by taking people and bring them out on your excursions? You've spoken about community building, different life lessons that you learn in showing people the outdoors. Can you talk about a little bit about your experiences in that regard?
Yeah, and obviously there's so much I could go into. The thing that pops into my head now when you mentioned that is, obviously if you're sitting on the internet and stuff, you step back and you think, boy, our world's so divided, and we're all so at arms right now. And it's interesting to get up in the wilderness with people of all walks of life, from all parts of not just the U.S. but abroad. Um, and you get up there, and these are people that probably, might have prejudged each other or whatever in a modern context, if you're filtered through social media or something. But up in the woods, it's like everybody gets along. We're kind of all on the same team, all gathered around, talking to one another, and you just see that that division doesn't have to be there. And so the ability to bring people together, I think, is really powerful. You get to know each other really quickly, so it's interesting how you could spend a year in an office with somebody and not really know them that well, but you spend a week up in the woods, and these are people you consider friends for a long time. Every time
Yeah.
somebody that's been on a course reaches out, I'm like, oh, awesome, Jim Road, or Sarah, whatever it is, and it's interesting that in just a week of that concentrated, undistracted time, how well you get to know one another. That's cool. And then, of course, all the natural lessons that come around. There's a lot of angles you could go, I guess, answering that question, but those are a couple of the aspects of it that popped into my head.
I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear if one of the natural lessons that you see maybe repeats over and over when you take people out.
I think it's interesting to not, you can't control as much as you'd like to control out there. So nature's going to do what she does, and you might rain for a week while you're there, or it might be cold, or whatever it be, or too hot, or whatever it is. But you kind of just have to learn to roll with the punches and make the best of every situation. And you can't protect yourself by going in and turning on the AC or this or that. You just you really have to be open and flexible and adapt to whatever the situation is. And the more you go in with a really rigid mindset of what something's going to look like, the more conflict, I guess, there's going to be, or the more it's going to grate you. So going out there and just kind of having that ability to flow and learn is something people are always confronted with, I think, or often. Good.
Yeah, I love that you say that too, because now this ties back into something I heard you say about your time on Alone. And I'd love if you could tell a story about how you had to adapt when you were trying to kill the moose, and it took you back to when you learned how to build a fence with the natives.
Yeah, that was interesting. When I got on Alone, I had a pretty solid, this would relate again to what we were just talking about. I had a pretty solid, probably preconception of what I thought it might look like up there. So I thought, I'd lived in Siberia. It was a similar environment. I thought, man, I'm going to go up there. There's going to be lots of berries, meaning there's going to be lots of grouse and bear and all that kind of stuff. So I'll go catch some fish, make a big pile of fish, and bait a bear in, and hunt the bear. And I got up there, and just wasn't what I was expecting. To be honest, I was pretty annoyed initially. I was like, man, I'm in this old burn, and there's no berries and no bear and no grouse. So I had all my expectations were kind of shook up. And it took me a while to reorient and realize, like, okay, well, there's a path forward here. I just got to adapt, like we were talking about, and stop being frustrated by what isn't and embrace what is. And so I had noticed that there's a moose sign around here. So I'd done all this work. It doesn't come across in the show really, but I spent a lot of time, whether it be relocating my shelter so that I was downwind, so the moose wouldn't smell me or recognize me, that I was there, and all kinds of stuff to try to set up an encounter with a moose. And at one point, I had strung up some cans across the trail so that when the moose came through, it'd clank those cans and it'd give me enough time to get prepared. One morning I woke up to those cans clanking, and I jumped out, and everything had worked perfectly. There was a moose standing out there in the middle of this mud flat. And I was like, oh, awesome. I took a shot and dropped the arrow right between its legs. I went to grab another arrow, and I realized I'd grabbed my camera, but I hadn't grabbed my quiver in kind of the chaos. And I was like, oh no. So I just watched the moose wander off back into the woods. And I had to think, man, on one hand, I was real disappointed, of course. On the other hand, it was awesome to have created the opportunity and see this giant beast of an animal. That was all pretty neat. And I immediately had to, instead of dwelling on, man, how did I miss that opportunity? I had to think, okay, what did I just see? What did I learn? And how can it made me that much more motivated to make an opportunity happen again. And so I followed the moose into the woods and tracked it and realized, that all these moose are moving through this area, but it was such a large area that there was no way to know where exactly they would be on the land. So I thought, man, I remember, we built huge fence complexes in Siberia that are just interlocking logs kind of stacked together in a particular way that would fence their reindeer in. And these would be like 30-kilometer fences, big, elaborate, a lot of work. But as I stood there and I'd followed that moose, I thought, you know what? I'm here to you're not going to win passively. I'm here to be active and find the way forward. And it's like not just wait for it to happen to me. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. I'm going to build a big fence between this cliff and that hill and funnel all the moose traffic onto one trail. And so that's what I did actually. Built that big old fence, and I wasn't actually done with it, but I had it halfway done, and it was enough that some days later, probably a week later, I had another more cans set up. I heard them clank. I ran over to the little mouth of my funnel, and sure enough, big old moose came lumbering up and gave me an opportunity, which was pretty awesome. It was an accumulation of a lot of hard work and failure and learning and adapting, as you say. So
that's incredible. That's incredible because I mean, here's something that you can never learn. This is just something that would you say this is like an instinct that you kind of have as well? Because that's
interesting. I consciously thought while I was out there that it's interesting to recognize how much of this is are things that I've learned, but also how much of it is just ingenuity on the spot and trying to come up with solutions to problems and being willing to try them and implement them and fail or pass. So yeah,
so then now that you take these people out there in the wilderness excursions and you've taken enough groups up, so you can probably see the trial and error that the average person makes and where they go wrong. Is there something that most people have a hard time with when you take them out there? Is there one thing that you go, okay, everybody has a really hard time grasping this?
It's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. I think I think different people have different, it varies for people, I'd say. But I think being willing to push, everybody at some point pushes themselves a little harder than they thought they could. Or, that happens very often where, you push people a little farther than they think they could go. And that's always difficult, but then in overcoming, which is neat. I've noticed with, a lot of times on my courses, I'll teach skills for a lot of the days, I'll provide the food and this and that, but I'll say, okay, on the last 24-hour period, we're going to, try to live off the land. So, implement the skills you've learned. And it's always interesting to see, maybe you go to a different lake and, we thought the fishing was going to be good, but it's not that great. And so then everybody gets like, are we going to starve? You can kind of feel that tension not in the room, but in the room. And it's always interesting to see people feel that and then push through it and, hopefully have success and kind of go over that little arc of stress and overcoming that I think is important to get comfortable with. It's important to get comfortable with pushing your, boundaries a little bit and getting out of your comfort zones, because the more you do that, actually, the more comfortable you are in dwelling on that edge.
I know that you experienced this on Alone too. Like calorie expenditure. Is this a big thing that the average person doesn't consider, when you're out there? They're out on the first day and you're thinking, okay, if I wasn't providing you food right now, there's no way you'd survive. You're working too hard.
Yeah, and that's a balance, because obviously Alone is a unique situation, but in general, like if you're out trying to just make a good go of it in the wilderness and live, it does take calories to earn calories, and you want to know how to do that wisely, because yeah, you can waste a lot of energy and burn up a lot of calories doing nothing. But ultimately, in order to be sustainable in the woods, it is a give and take. So like we've definitely seen on Alone a lot of people who can just, you can just have a good mindset and starve it out for 3 months or so, and that's great. But the show is kind of a unique setup. If you want to actually, say how the Evenke live in the woods, they are expending a lot of calories but they're also doing it wisely in order to create more than they're expending. And really, it's walking that line that allows you to be sustainable in the woods. Otherwise, it's kind of just a downhill spiral. So I'm not actually. I kind of like when people try hard, even if they're burning up more calories than they're getting in, because it's that trying and that struggle that's eventually going to get you to unlock the pieces of the puzzle that are whatever sustainability looks like in your area.
That's very that's very interesting. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a couple survival sort of questions. So, I always think like at one time I was lost in British Columbia, I had a car breakdown, and it was just like, I mean, it was 6 hours of woods out there. And I'm thinking in my head,
Man.
okay, if nobody came to get me, I am done. Right. But
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
but if you were out there, you'd be like, okay, this is great. I'll, you might have a resort built by the time somebody comes. So if you're ever put in a survival setting, like particularly like the one you were in and Alone, it's called
Mhm.
like a British Columbia type place. What's the first thing that you do in a survival setting, or what's the first thing that you teach people when you're out there on an excursion?
I don't actually have a hard, fast set of rules. It's like I have to, like, you always hear, and it's true. You have so many hours before you need shelter, water, fire, all these things, and those are all true. But I really am a believer in the idea that you also need to be pretty adaptable to the situation. So, um, in a situation you find yourself alone, there's just so many variables. It's like, well, of course you need to find shelter and water. And in a place like British Columbia, the far north, that's usually not difficult. There's usually water around. There's usually, boughs and things you can make into a shelter, if not rocks and caves and things like that. But um, I mean, I think it's absolutely vital that you know how to build a fire, because that's going to be uh, imperative for whether it be for boiling water to make it drinkable, staying warm. I think everybody that goes in the woods needs to know a few ways of making a fire and have a few options available to them. So when I go out, I take something easy like a lighter, but those are prone to fail. So I always also have a backup ferro rod, which won't ever fail. You always get a fire started. And third line of defense is I do know how to make a bow drill fire should I lose everything or not have it for some reason. So having multiple ways of making a fire is gonna make survival almost, you almost have to. So, but it's amazing how much confidence even just that will give you when you're out there. So on day one, I always teach, we delve into fire building and make sure everybody's comfortable with all the methods, rain, whether it be wet or dry or what. I think that's super important.
On the show, some of the animals you cooked, like if it was me, if I went out there and I killed the rabbit, I'm just eating the rabbit's legs, or
Right.
I wouldn't even think to eat the rabbit's organs, right? But
Uh-huh.
this is very important, right? You were like eating their brains and everything, right?
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting. But fat is incredibly valuable and hard to come by in the woods. You can't actually. So for a rabbit is a perfect example. If we get a rabbit, typically coming from our culture or whatever, we would just eat the meat and throw away the rest. But it's actually almost the opposite that you do. It's like you need to eat the brain, the eyes, the organs. That's where all the fat, that's where the vitamins and stuff are. And honestly, so the protein is almost too much. So there's a thing called protein poisoning, where if you eat too much protein without enough fat, it takes more calories to digest than your body's receiving from the food. So you actually lose weight faster. So it's interesting to observe nature and like the animals outside and what they do. So, for example, if I had fish and the wolverine got into my fish stash, it would eat the head, try to pick away at the eyeballs, it'd pull the belly, eat the belly, eat the skin off, and then it would discard the fillets. It wouldn't even really chew into the meat part of it, which I thought was interesting. Same with a raven would come down while I'm fishing and grab a fish behind me and peck its eyes out. It's the first thing it would go for. But it's interesting to observe that, yeah, we need the fat. And a lot of times that is not the part of the cuts of the meat that we in our modern culture would gravitate towards, but it is what you need to do.
Is that something? Is that something that you learned from the Evenke, or how did you?
Yeah, so we always, the Evenke would, they'd take a reindeer down and they'd split its head open and just spread the brain on some like butter on whatever they were eating. So, and their favorite, delicacy of a reindeer was the intestine. So they'd pull the intestines out, wash them out briefly, and then just boil up those intestines, and they're real fatty. The raw liver, they would just eat the raw liver right away. That was another thing they loved. And the meat, the cuts of meat, of course we ate it, but it was never the thing that was prized, which is super interesting. So some of that I learned, and some of it I had to learn on the fly on alone, because although I had eaten all those things, I had never tried to survive solely on a ketogenic forest diet. And so when I was catching, I caught something like 28 rabbits in the first couple weeks, and I was just like, man, well, I got lots of rabbit. I wonder how long you can survive off of rabbits alone. And it was at that time that I learned, well, you actually don't keep weight on any fat. I was losing weight just as fast as everybody that wasn't eating anything. So interestingly enough, so you can't last long on protein alone.
And then, so you thought to boil them, right? Is that the smartest way to do it? Make soups out of them?
It's the most efficient. If you're roasting on a stick over a fire, a lot of those little bits of fat are dripping off. And I love to have fried stuff. I like that way of cooking as much as anybody. But boiling is probably the most efficient. You literally get everything off of every bone. And so in a true survival situation, I would often do that. I would recommend that.
In reality, boiling it would be the most nutrient conserving way to consume this type of food. The organs.
Yeah, especially in those situations. And we'd often, amongst the Evenke, and in most situations, roasting over the fire is great. But in a time when every calorie counts and I think boiling is the smartest way to go. Unless you have on alone, I had a nice big frying pan, so I could throw everything in that pan and kind of fry it in if I had moose fat or whatever, and have a pretty delicious meal that way. But
right there.
With most of my fish and all that stuff, I'd just boil it just to get every little speck off of every bone.
And now, when you built your shelter there, did you use more techniques that you learned from the Evenke?
No, yes, they were incorporated, but I kind of just built my shelter on the fly. I didn't have a plan of what I was going to build when I got there. I just was like, well, we'll see if I have, if I have cliffs and rocks and stuff, that'll be one thing. It turns out I didn't. So I just built a pretty, I don't know if you'd call basic A-frame out there, but it's a basic shelter you can kind of build anywhere. Interestingly, this type of shelter build you do on alone is a fairly specific type, of build. Often you're going to either build like an overnight or a few day shelter, or you're going to actually take the time to build something that's going to last some years. On alone, you're building this in between shelter that lasts, a few months, but you don't want to spend too many calories on it, so you keep it real simple. But unlike a thing we would build with the Evenke, where we're just crashing out for a night or two, on alone is you're going to want to build something with a nice little fireplace inside. And so I just relied a lot on common sense to create what I created. And honestly, it was a great little shelter. When I first built it, it was smokier than I liked inside. So it's things like that. Okay, well, how do I make sure this shelter isn't smoky? And I built a little hood vent and funneled air into the base of the fire using a little air vent to get a draft going. So you kind of evolve the shelter as you go. And I ended up fur lining the doors so it was really sealed. And then as snow gathered, it was a small enough shelter that I could just bury it in snow and it'd be nice and insulated. So it served me really well, but it was
Right.
something I more or less came up with on the fly.
Improvise. So it's like it's obvious that
Yeah.
you've got a knack for this. This is like, comes second nature to you. It's kind of amazing. With somebody like me who would be completely clueless of what to do. I'd be making out of leaves. It would blow away in a couple hours. So I know in Alone they only gave you a handful of items to bring, but let's say you were going to go out there, you were going to give somebody advice on here are some of the things, the must-haves that if you were going to go out into the wilderness, what would they be?
Well, I mentioned it earlier that you need multiple ways of starting a fire. And again, I'm all for matches or a lighter, so take those. But those are a little bit unreliable, so take yourself a ferro rod too. And then, and you might as well, especially when you're not as familiar with what's out there available, you might as well take with you something easy to get a fire started, which would be like cotton balls with Vaseline. If you mix those, that's a great fire starter. So there you've kind of got your fire taken care of at that point. You're always going to need some kind of, I think it's a big advantage to have, whether it be a space blanket, a Mylar blanket, or a tarp, some kind of waterproof covering. You're gonna need that. A water bottle, something to carry water, and let's see, what am I mean, it depends on how. I always take, another thing that's hard to make in the woods that you want to take is fishing hooks and line. Like I always have a little mini fishing kit on me just because primitive fishing hooks are inefficient and difficult to make. I always take a strand of paracord that can work as fishing line. It can help you build your shelter. And there's even certain types of fishing line you can get that have a little strand of fire starting stuff in them and a little strand of wire and a strand of actual fishing line. It's called survival cord. I think that's a great thing to have in your pack. It's so useful. And cordage is another thing that you can make in the woods, but you'll save yourself a lot of trouble if you have it already. So those are a few things I'd make sure you have.
So another thing I want to make sure I ask you, because I think this is another kind of like ingenious thing that you went through it. You tell a story about, when you were with the Evenke and you cut your knee open, right? You were.
No, yeah.
And so, this is for, let's say somebody does get hurt. You're out there in the wild, you slice yourself open. I mean, what are some of the nature's remedies that you can use to disinfect this thing and take care of it? Like if you could explain the story about how you hit your knee and how they remedied it, how they took care of it.
Yeah. So like I said earlier when we were talking, I wasn't as good with an axe as I thought I was when I got there. We would cut, so many trees building those fences, and eventually one errant swing this way or that, and I ended up chopping my knee, and I chopped it pretty good with my axe is razor sharp, and it chopped right through the tendon on the inside of my right knee, and yeah, it was pretty gnarly. I was like, oh man, I have whacked myself good. I was like, I ran back to the teepee kind of as fast as I could, knowing that I was still in shock, so I can still move, but I knew it was going to be bad. And it did get super painful. I couldn't move for several days. But it was interesting. We didn't have any. All we did was we went out, chopped a spruce tree. They got a bunch of spruce sap and rubbed it on my knee, and the thing never got infected at all. So kind of an amazing demonstration of the ability of, well, in that particular case, pine sap, spruce sap, to be a natural disinfectant. And it is. So We use spruce, but fir, pine, they all have antimicrobial and antibacterial properties, the sap. So that's usually a really available and easy thing to find that you can put on a injury. And there's, of course, there's an infinite amount of pharmacology to learn in the woods, but that's a simple one to get started.
Yeah, that's
And it's
incredible.
cool to know all that stuff. It just makes your outdoor experience more rich because you recognize, oh, this plant's good for that, and that's good for that, and I think it's good stuff to know.
Other seasons of Alone, we've seen people get kicked out after a tiny cut gets infected. So,
Right.
so it's just having that knowledge there for people, something so simple to find, is like could really
Yeah,
be a life-saving thing if you're ever in that situation.
absolutely.
One more question, but you do have this on your site, and I would love if you can help explain this, because I think a lot of people have been in a situation where you have been stepping on a lake covered in ice, and you think,
No.
what would happen if this thing
Yeah.
broke, right?
Yeah.
How would you how do you teach people to handle that situation? You fall into ice.
Yeah, obviously you don't want to go out on thin ice, or if you go on ice that's even remotely questionable, it's good to put a long stick under your armpits, like carry a long stick with you so that if you break through, that stick catches and you can kind of fold over that stick and you won't fall all the way in. That said, it happens where you somehow find yourself on ice. You didn't know there was an undercurrent. The ice is thin and you fall through. And the key in that situation is, of course, it's going to hit you and you're going to have that like panic. All the air is going to go out of you. But you want to stay calm. You're going to be fine. You turn around and grab come out the way you came. So you kind of flop because obviously the way you came, the ice held. So going back that same way is the way you want to go back. You flop your body up on there and then just kind of crawl out, laying down kind of on the ice, because you want to spread your weight as much as you can. Crawl back up and out of your hole the same way you came from, and crawl, spreading your weight off the ice as quickly as you can. Get the fire started. That's a situation where, say that happened and you only had a lighter or matches, you'll be happy you had a waterproof means to get a fire started. So that's why I like having more than one.
I love it.
But you want to be extra careful if you're on a river, because what sucks, and a lot of people die on rivers because they'll fall through and that current pulls you away from your hole. So be extra aware if you're ever crossing a frozen river, and then take a nice long stick with you that if you do break through, you catch yourself.
Well, hey, Jordan, thank you so much for, sharing your knowledge with us today. For the people out there, how can everybody find you if they want to go on one of your excursions or just learn more about you?
Yeah, follow me on Instagram if you have that. I got it's at Hobo Jordo. And then jordanjonas.com is my website. And there you can find me and get on my email list. Also, you can just shoot me a message and say you're interested on getting on the courses. Soon I'll have the 2024 schedule out. So if you get on my email list at jordanjonas.com, I'll send you an email when that comes out. And I'll be doing a few different, pretty cool options this summer for survival skills or exploration, or even a family. I want to do some family courses. So
that sounds amazing. I would love to do that at some point in time. I'm on the email list. So when you send them out, awesome. I would love to do that at some point in time. Well, hey, thank you so much, Jordan. You enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Michael.